Hi, this is video 2 of lesson 1 titled What is Fear? And we're talking about 3 different types of fear. And remember where we left off in the last video, we looked at some of the differences in Western and Hebrew definitions of fear, but we acknowledge the similarity that both Western and Hebrew definitions of fear points back to a basic human instinct to preserve self. Okay, and so now we're going to talk about 3 different types of fear as it pertains to each Western and Hebrew thought. Both Western and Hebrew thought have these 3 different types of fear in common. The first of the 3 is irrational fear. It's irrational fear. And from a Western perspective, irrational fear is a particular type of emotional reaction to a perception or belief that is perceived by others as unreasonable. And so although it's called irrational, what happens is that other people don't really acknowledge the Western definition of fear from the perspective of whether it is rational or irrational. Instead, we judge based on whether it is seen as reasonable or unreasonable. So we're going to say that in Western fear, the irrational fear is unreasonable. Okay, unreasonable. The Hebraic concept of fear, irrational fear, is any physical response that to a perception or belief in the absence of rationalization about the perception or belief. And so in irrational fear, there is no rationalizing. So the person doesn't really think at all about whether or not his perception is if it makes sense or if it's true and correct. Okay, and so the next type of fear is rational fear. I'm going to talk about rational fear. And with rational fear, from a Western standpoint, it is a particular type of emotional reaction to a perception or belief that is perceived by others as reasonable. So we say it's rational because it makes sense. Question is, who does it make sense to? And who is it reasonable or unreasonable to? We have to define for ourselves what is reasonable and what is unreasonable. And that's a very subjective thing, because depending on who you ask, something that seems reasonable to one person may seem unreasonable to another. So in Hebrew thought, this is not a problem, because rational fear is considered a fear where a person does rationalize. And it says nothing about whether it makes sense to someone else or not. It just says that this person actually thought through what it was they perceived. Okay, they thought through their fear to really see if it made sense. The third type, which is really a whole different breed, because not everyone attains this or experiences this, but everyone experiences rational and irrational fear. But this third type is the fear of God. All right, and in the fear of God, from a Western perspective, when we say someone fears God or someone has the fear of God, we're actually saying, we're talking about reverence or respect, right? Reverence or a deep respect for God. Again, with this abstract way of thinking, we have to question, what is respect in the sight of God? What level of respect does God consider deep? And so we really can't answer these questions, because man can try and answer these questions, and what you'll have is a very subjective range of answers as to what it means to respect God and what it means to respect God deeply. But in Hebrew, again, this problem is alleviated, because it's a whole really different kind of concept than from as opposed to Western thought. And one thing that you can do to really see the fear of God with clear sight is to look at Ecclesiastes 12:13 in the Hebrew language. And in the Hebrew language, the fear of God is literally the fear that belongs to God. It's God's fear. And so it's not man's fear about God. It's actually God's fear adapted by man. And so rational fear, fear of God is a rational fear in consideration of Yah's perspective above our own. And this is truly a superhuman ability for us to see things through God's eyes. And so we rationalize in consideration of God. And this is a superhuman, unlike the other two forms of fear, which are based in basic human instinct. These are superhuman abilities. And it's not based on self-preservation, but trust in Yah's infinite knowledge and wisdom. Yeshua teaches us best what it means to fear God when he sacrifices his own life in hopes that the word and will of God will stand. And so he gives up his own life. He self-sacrifices. And this is what the fear of God is. The fear of God is self-sacrificing as opposed to acting in self-preservation. And so the fear of God is really opposed in most cases to that natural humanistic fear that we all experience. As we continue throughout these lessons, keep these principles in mind and these differences. We are going to focus the rest of these lessons on the Hebrew concept of fear and the Hebraic perspective of fear. And in doing so, all of these basic premises will be proven throughout the course. And so, again, keep this in mind, take notes, write this down, and we'll see you in the next video.